What if the strangest conspiracy theory of the last century wasn't a conspiracy at all? Well, for decades, the CIA and the US military quietly poured millions of dollars into secret programs designed to answer one unbelievable question. Can human beings spy on distant locations using only their mind? And I know it sounds crazy, but in this episode, former Army veteran Swann Hazlett takes us deep into the world of classified psychic warfare programs connected to MKUltra, Stargate, Operation Grill Flame, and remote viewing at large. We get into claims that intelligence agencies have actually used psychics to locate hostages, to map enemy facilities, to track down missing aircraft, and gather information that satellites couldn't find. Swann also explains how military personnel were allegedly recruited into these programs, why government agencies kept funding them year after year, and why some researchers believe that these capabilities never actually disappeared when the programs were supposedly shut down. Were these experiments and operations just crazy Cold War fever dreams, or did intelligence agencies discover something so disturbing that parts of it remain hidden to this very day? Well, if you are into CIA secrets, psychic spies, mind control research, remote viewing, and the classified history behind one of the most controversial programs that was ever revealed, well, this is the episode for you. So, sit back, relax, and welcome to camp. Swann Hazlett, how are you?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing excellent. I'm so excited to chat with you. Thank you so much for joining me in the tent.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah.
This is an amazing setup you got here, man.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oh man, you got a Marian Apparition.
Absolutely. Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared to the great Saint Juan Diego in central Mexico.
Oh boy. I'm going to sound kooky, but I just had a dream about a week ago. And in the dream, I'm walking across this field. It's like, I felt like Los Angeles or something like that. And this blue woman, I look up, this blue woman appears, and it has this like Mesoamerican energy. Then I look down, and then she disappears. And I had this feeling of awe, whatever. Again, it's just a dream. So go to ChatGPT. I'm like, you must be familiar with the lady with the Bledsoe stuff, right? So I'm like, are there any Marian apparitions? Which is kind of the lady could be in that camp, right? I'm not saying it's the Virgin Mary, but I think they kind of fit that profile. And I look it up, and
that's what you see.
That's what was described, because it was also before that a Mesoamerican Aztec like deity. I can't remember what her name was, but it's associated with like the Blue Lady.
Right.
Anyway, just a weird. This stuff happens all the time. Well,
I want to talk a lot about like synchronicities, things that have been coming up in your life, and kind of your experience with what I've heard people describe as, high strangeness, perhaps, broadly speaking. The experiences with the supernatural and the esoteric, and you have many of them, which I'm very excited to jump into. And we got connected through our mutual friend, Kurt Metzger. And I had asked Kurt specifically about remote viewing. And I was like, remote viewing is one of these things that it's weird because there's genuine programs within the United States government that have funded millions of dollars into remote viewing. It seems like it's going on even until this very day as we're sitting here. And it's been featured in television shows like Stranger Things, and it's been put into broad media. But it's one of these things that's still so difficult for me to wrap my head around how this is possible and why this is happening. I've heard stories of it being tested with children. I've heard all sorts of crazy stories. And I said, Kurt, do you know anyone that could speak about this intelligently? And he said, I have great news for you. My friend Swann is not only brilliant, but he's also very much invested in this field. And I looked you up and immediately was so eager to chat with you because you have a very interesting resume and sort of backstory that leads you into this. And I think you are supremely qualified to talk about what is remote viewing, how it works, who's doing it, and ultimately why. Like, what is happening metaphysically? They're allowing people to see things even when they're not there. Thousands, potentially even millions of miles away, which are some of the crazier stories. And then taking me through some of the beats of these, famous remote viewers and what they've actually been able to achieve. So starting from you and kind of how you get into this, what is your background? Where did you go to school? What did you study? And take us through that story, how you got to remote viewing.
Okay. So I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, about a mile from, Kurt's always talking about Arden. I grew up about a mile away from that place, or 1 or 2 miles away.
And what is Arden?
It's just like a guild house that allegedly there's been stuff related to like satanic ritual abuse and things like that. I'd never heard anything like that when I was a kid, but it's just odd that I grew up about 1 to 2 miles away from it. Anyway, grew up in Wilmington, Delaware. I went undergrad to Stanford. I majored in history and also got a degree in electrical engineering. My parents were both teachers. My dad was like a high school math teacher. My mother was a grade school teacher. And I couldn't afford Stanford. There's no way. I got in and my dad was kind of pissed because he's just like, we're not going to be able to afford college for the other 2 kids. I'm like, look, I'll figure it out. So I got an ROTC scholarship, got a few other scholarships that basically made the tuition about $200 a year. And then parents had to cover room and board.
Wow.
So, and I majored in electrical engineering so I could be employable, and then history just because it was fascinating to me. So went to Stanford, got the degree, then had to serve 4 years in the Army. It subsequently became 5 years, but we'll get into that in a second. And I was assessed as what they call a military intelligence officer, but they branch detailed me, which is just a fancy way of saying we don't need that many lieutenants in military intelligence. So we loaned them out to a combat arms unit, right? So I got armor, tanks, that sort of thing. And then 4 years later, they send you back to, what is it? I think Kurt calls it Fort Hucktua, but Fort Huachuca in Arizona, where typically you train to be a captain and all that good stuff. So I made a decision when I was 18 about whether or not I wanted to have a military career. And the way that I did it is I also had an appointment to the military academy. And I just decided that, if I want to make this a career, I'll go there. But if I want to kind of just wait and see what it's like, and then decide, I went the ROTC route.
Hey, real quick, most people who watch this channel aren't subscribed. And when you subscribe, you help the channel grow and you stay in the loop with every new drop. Religion Camp, History Camp, and Camp Gagnon. Now let's get back to it.
So anyway, I did ROTC. When I was in the Army, I was an armor officer. We were stationed at Fort Irwin, which is in the Mojave Desert. And we were the red team, call it. So before 9/11, I was an expert on Soviet armored doctrine and tactics. And we would have these massive war games think of it like a fancy form of laser tag. You had these like Raytheon sensors that you could reach out and touch somebody from, several kilometers away. And then every vehicle would be instrumented. You have about 5,000 people on either side, and you'd have these massive war games. And our role was just to beat the piss out of whoever we were fighting so that we could expose what their weaknesses. And we could do everything the Soviets used to be able to do. Use chemical weapons, with CS gas and that sort of thing to make it seem real. And I just became an expert doing that. And it was a blast. At least the 4 hours when you're actually fighting, the hours before that and the hours after that sucked. But during that 4 or 5 hours, it was just absolute bliss because you're just spanking these guys left and right. And anyway, I enjoyed doing that. Then 9/11 happened. So I was a lieutenant, I think first lieutenant when that happened. And we had a guy who was a major. He actually went down to CENTCOM headquarters in, I think it's Tampa Bay, Florida.
Yeah.
And while he was there, he did a bunch of planning. He went to the School of Advanced Military Studies, where they call it like Jedi something or other in the Army, and where it planned all these operations. When he came back, he said that they had planned 8 to 10 years of military operations in the Middle East that basically would reshape it. So it wasn't just Afghanistan, it wasn't just Iraq, it was Syria, it was Iran, it was all that stuff. And fortunately, we didn't get that far into it and do it because it just obviously didn't make any sense. So after that, I got put on something called stop loss because I was a military intelligence officer on paper, but I had no training in intelligence at all. So I had to get a TSSCI clearance, all that stuff. But as in any bureaucracy, they don't plan for these things. So when I said, well, I was ready to go to the next course at Huachuca, I'm like, oh, well, there's a delay or a backlog for 18 months, right? I'm like, all right, well, I'm just going to sit here and just wait. So I got to see all the preparation before we invaded Iraq. And we knew in October of like, at least October 2002 that we were going to go in, because we were training for chemical weapons use in the Karbala Gap, and we had built this massive trench complex and all that stuff to train people for it. So anyway, I get out of the Army. I decide that I want to go to business school, but I also want to keep that national security expertise kind of current. So I went to the Kennedy School of Government to get a master in public policy. And then I also went to Harvard Business School I didn't have any business experience or anything like that. After then, I'll kind of fast forward. But after that, I spent some time, was like an investment banker for a little bit. Lots of mental masturbation there, as you can possibly imagine. And then I worked in various roles in corporate finance. So this has nothing to do with any of this stuff, but I was at Juul when it was like going crazy. And then I was also at Juul when it was, the government started. Yeah, it was, you could write a book on it, but I can't, obviously. I signed a bunch of NDAs.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. Anyway, I got into this topic. Well, one last thing, my thesis advisor when I was at the Kennedy School was Dr. Ash Carter, who subsequently became, like 8 years later, became Obama's Secretary of Defense. My master's thesis was on Plan B for Iran's nuclear program. So I wrote this thing in like 2006. So anytime I had friends in government who would say, hey, do you got any good open source reports on this issue? And he said that, like, from all different government agencies, every time one of the people that would send them something back would be my master's thesis.
Wow.
So, which has been frustrating because I'm watching this Shiza show, and it's just like...
you saw this coming 20 years ago.
Yeah, but things are like radically different than they were. Like, we had people in theater. Drones, we were the ones with drones, right? There's been a whole evolution. Technologically, but also just application of these like new technologies that, unfortunately, with the Russia-Ukraine war, they've been able to leverage and learn, both sides, on how to employ these things. And we're behind in terms of, like, I would say that it's very similar to where the Germans were at the beginning of World War II, right? Where the French, like Heinz Guderian was like the German theoretician who saw the Battle of Cambrai when the British employed tanks, and he came to the conclusion you got to use them in packs, right? Like entire units, like tank divisions and things like that. Whereas the French would just put pepper tanks throughout their different, infantry battalions, and he just, it was obviously very effective for the Germans in World War II. We're kind of at a similar point, right? With drones, there's going to be these massing tactics and kind of using them en masse instead of just peppering them throughout different organizations. But then on top of that, you also have AI, right?
Right.
And AI is going to
radically shift.
And it's going to be a predator-prey thing, because that AI is going to have to adapt to the other AI, and they're going to adapt so quickly that we're not going to be able to track it.
Right.
Same thing with cyber, right? The same issues. Anyway.
People are listening to this, and they're like, how does a guy go from Stanford undergrad to military intelligence to then Kennedy School and then Harvard Business School and then get involved in remote viewing?
Okay, so the next step in this whole evolution is I read this book called Psychic Warrior by David Morehouse. He's somebody you should absolutely talk to, by the way. He's far more knowledgeable in remote viewing. I think he's trained 20,000+ people on how to do it. So he has a book where he talks about how he got recruited into the program. So it started out, he was Ranger Regiment commander, which is very, very rare. Not like very few people get selected for that role. And he was in a training exercise in a valley. It's called like the Haunted Valley of the Jinn, Batn al-Ghul in Jordan, okay? And during this training exercise, a Jordanian soldier with a machine gun shot him in the head, either accidentally or accidentally on purpose. Don't know, but Obviously, he's wearing his Kevlar, so it caused like a hematoma, but it didn't kill him, but sure as hell knocked him out.
Right.
And he said that when it happened to him, it was as if he shifted a channel on a radio station. Like somebody dialed it up somewhere else, and he had like a an experience with another, either being, his higher self, something that just told him, look, you're on the wrong path. You're not supposed to be kind of in this kind of war thing. You're supposed to be doing something else. And he didn't want to tell anybody about it because he wouldn't be deployable, and they would yank him out of the Ranger regiment. You got to be deployable at all times, right? So he kind of kept it to himself until he had this new assignment. And like most Army officers, he doesn't want to do the whole recruiting thing, right? So he's trying to desperately find a way around that. And his next assignment is kind of an intelligence assignment working with the DIA. Now, I'm not sure when he went to the activity. Are you familiar with the intelligence, the ISA? So it's sometimes called Royal Cape, Task Force Orange, right? It's like the intelligence side of special ops for the Army. Okay. Anyway, he did some assignments there, but he also did an assignment in the DIA. When he first went to DIA, there was a psychologist that had to talk to him, right? And at the very end of every session, he would say, "Is there anything else you want to tell me?" And it said it just got to him because he felt like he's like, it's a polygraph and all that. So he said, "Fuck it. Like, can I curse?"
Yeah, you're actually required to curse.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, just be careful. Don't. You could take Sean out of the Army, but you can't take the Army out of Sean. So anyway, he tells this guy what happened. And the guy kind of looks at him and says, "I might have something for you." He pulls out this folder and it says Grill Flame on it. Okay. And he said, "Why don't you take a look at these? Just read through the entire folder and come back to me when you're done and we can talk." And what it was the remote viewing production of a bunch of former remote viewers. Some of it was involved in mapping the embassy, the U.S. embassy in Tehran during the hostage crisis. I think there was other stuff related to locating hostages in Lebanon when Hezbollah took U.S. hostages in like 82, 83, and a number of other things. And literally there were people mapping what the embassy was, because apparently for some reason or another, we didn't have maps back at the State Department for that particular embassy in Tehran. I mean, we had on-site maps, but he couldn't really do anything for us if it was taken. So that's how he kind of got started. And he kind of met with the team, and after that, that's kind of where he learned how to develop this capability. And then the capability, there's a whole story behind that. I'll just stop, breathe a little bit there. And
this is Operation Grill Flame is the thing that he looked into.
So it went by various names, right? So it was at one point called Center Lane, at one point called Grill Flame. Another time it was called, I'm like blanking on one of the names. And then it finally ended up with what everybody else hears, which is Stargate. Okay, but they're constantly changing names of these programs from time to time. But it was Project Grill Flame, Project Stargate.
And they're all functionally the same thing.
Yeah. Sunstreak was the other one.
I see.
Yeah, so there's like 4 names that I can remember that are related to this program.
What's up, guys? We're going to take a break real quick because I want to tell you a little story, all right? I don't know if this is just what happens once you hit like your late 20s like I am, but I started noticing a bunch of little things that didn't seem connected, but they actually are. I would be tired, and then somehow I'd be like awake all night. I'd have trouble falling asleep. I go to the gym and I don't recover like I did when I was 18. And it felt like I was doing everything right, but my body just wasn't responding the way that it did like 5 or 10 years ago. So I started looking into it. And the one thing that kept on coming up is cortisol. It's your body's stress hormone. And between like doing shows and podcasts and trying to be a dad and being on screens and doom scrolling all day, my stress level was just elevated all the time. And that is what led me to Mars Men. This is awesome. And if you listen right now, it's almost empty because I take it every single day. What I like is that it isn't just focused on one thing. It's made with natural ingredients that are designed to support healthy testosterone production while also helping your body manage cortisol levels. And it's made right here in the United States. Every batch is third-party tested, and there's no weird like stimulants or synthetic hormones or any of that stuff. Since I've been taking it, I've noticed steadier energy, better recovery after I work out, and I just feel more like myself. I'm able to do way more. Plus, there's a 90-day money-back guarantee, and over 91% of users report higher energy levels. And great news, for a limited time, the campers that listen to this program will get 50% off for life, plus free shipping and 3 free gifts at mengotomars.com. That is mengotomars.com for 50% off and 3 free gifts when you check out. And after you pick up your Mars for Men, just tell them that Mark and Christos from the campsite sent you. Now, let's get back to the show. So now at this point, people are listening, they're like, hold on. The U.S. government and the military is using remote viewers to target locations and target enemies, and this seems like absurd. But there's a long history of this within U.S. intelligence to use remote viewers. And we actually did an episode on Ingo Swann, one of the most like notorious sort of disclosed CIA remote viewers. Are you familiar with Ingo Swann's story? What can you tell us about Ingo Swann?
Yeah, a little bit about Ingo Swann. So he was a natural-born gifted psychic. He worked with the Stanford Research Institute to, well, first of all, they tested his capabilities, right? So they would ask him to identify, they would go on these outbound projects where they would just go to places in Palo Alto, and then they would ask him to remote view what he was seeing. And they would do that over and over again. They would put him in a Faraday cage, and they were able to prove that, yes, it still worked if you're inside a Faraday cage.
Faraday cage basically like stops any type of electromagnetic frequency. If you put your phone into it, it's neutralized.
Right, which is to say that whatever this is, it likely operates at a non-local level, like a quantum level, as opposed to electromagnetic. There's probably an electromagnetic component when the signal comes back in your body and your brain translates it and goes through that. But they ran a bunch of experiments where he basically demonstrated that, yes, this absolutely works. And there was something else that they had him view. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it kind of freaked them out. There was also another psychic. His name was Pat Price. Mm-hmm. Pat Price definitely freaked out the CIA because they asked him to remote view some some random cabin in West Virginia. But the way remote viewing works is if there's a lot of energy in a target, right? So for instance, if it's like very, 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 very important that you keep it secret, that target generates a lot of energy, right? So it almost makes it shine like a beacon in that space. So as he's looking for this one target, his attention gets directed to this classified NSA site. And so he starts talking about that. He literally reads off folder names of projects, like Project Cue Ball, and like it was a bunch of billiards kind of related projects. So they take this stuff to the CIA, and the CIA is like, this is like garbage. What is this? And then they come to find out that, no, it's not garbage. There was an NSA facility that they didn't even know about. And they went and corroborated that, yes, these projects are real projects. So anyway, they got to that point where like, okay, this stuff is real. So then they wanted Ingo to come up with a way to train soldiers to do it. So he didn't really have a protocol. He didn't really kind of explain how he did it. So he had to develop a protocol that they could literally train anybody to do, but was repeatable. And you went through, and there's various stages depending on like when Ingo trained somebody. He trained some people in some stages, others he chose not to. But generally, like if you average it out, there's about 6 stages. There's more than that at the classified level. I don't know what they are. I just know from what Lynn Buchanan has said publicly. But the point is to just be able to train anybody because this is a capability that anybody has. I know that from public filings, they spent about $20 million from like the early 70s until 1995 when it was quote unquote shut down. And that was on the heels of when David Morehouse released his book, Psychic Warrior. And that's a whole other story about how he was harassed and it got pretty ugly for him.
And for anyone that doesn't know, at this point, I think most people have kind of picked up what we're talking about when we're saying remote viewing, but it is this act of a person that is generally trained in this type of, technology, so to speak, that is able to see an item or a target that is many miles away from them just by kind of closing their eyes and going into this semi-meditative state. Is there any more that you could add into like more or less what it is if you were going to define it for someone that's never heard of it?
Yeah, this is very specific, and this causes a lot of there's a lot of information, and there's some people who are broader, will like kind of broaden the category, and there's a lot of people, and there's other people who are very narrow definition, like David Morehouse has a very narrow definition. And I won't do it justice, but basically, that's not to say that psychic capability doesn't exist and that everybody else that's not doing remote viewing, it's all garbage. A lot of that stuff's legitimate too. So just think of it as there's a broad category called divination, okay? And divination is being able to detect things in space and time, okay? So you might have the I Ching, right, which is a Chinese kind of method of doing that. You might have tarot. You might have, or you have astrology, things like that. Or you might just have naturally gifted psychics who can, do what they do and predict certain things. Remote viewing is very specific. So it is a methodology where it tends to be single or double blind protocol. By single blind, the person receives nothing more than an 8-character number, okay? That corresponds to a target, right? They, not always, but most of the time, you don't tell them you're looking for a person, you're looking for a thing, they don't even get that. And the reason you do that is you want to short circuit that your imagination, right? You don't want to, if I tell you, and there's an example of this I talked about on Julian's show that was related to the Heaven's Gate kind of side, right, or mass side, whatever you want to call it,
mm-hmm.
where someone was front-loaded, right? And front-loaded just means that they were given a sense of what their target was, which was the Hale-Bopp comet, and there was like a speck of something in the comet. So immediately, Courtney Brown, who was tasked to do it by Art Bell on Coast to Coast AM, immediately his brain starts coming up with like UFOs, motherships, all that stuff. That can get you into a lot of trouble, because if you trigger somebody like that, it's difficult to separate your imagination from what your subconscious is giving you for the target. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, which is why you have to have a single or double blind protocol. Now, double blind is when the person who assigns you the target doesn't know what the target is either. Okay? And then what happens is, it's usually, let's take like a 6-stage process. There's a bunch of different protocols. There's CRV, which is by some names coordinate remote viewing. Some call it, why am I blanking? There's another, there's coordinate remote viewing, and I'll come up with it. Controlled remote viewing is the other name. It's basically the same thing. But you get this number, you kind of relax, you try to get into an alpha wave brain state, and you just start to open that aperture of sight, right? And you just, is it man-made? Is it land? Is it water? Is it a life form? And you just kind of come up with that. And then it just progresses to the point where when you get widen that aperture of perception, then you're starting to draw full scenes and describe smells. Sometimes if you send somebody to a target where there's like, let's say somebody sent you to Chernobyl, people, if they're not careful, will start to bilocate. Now, this is not like bilocation when you're talking about saints, where, literally somebody's in two, or Padre Pio, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're in two places at once. It's not that when you're talking about remote viewing, but they start to exhibit physical characteristics or physical symptoms of if they were in that environment. So one of the things you have to be very careful is, in the military, they generally, if you have if you're a heat casualty, you have like heat stroke, or if you have you had hypothermia or something like that, they record that because you're more susceptible if it happens again. So if somebody had a heat casualty sometime in the past and you send them to Chernobyl, like they might actually experience some physical distress, right? And might have heat exhaustion or things like that. But you start to experience feeling of being there. So it's not just what you see, it's what you smell, it's what you hear, it's what you feel, right? And some people are what you taste. Some people are better at certain senses than others. And according to Lynn Buchanan, they actually identify where people tend to be good. They might be better at colors. They might be terrible at faces. So it's a skill that's acquired. And like anything else, it's something that most, if not, I don't want to say all people can do it, right? Because somebody who has like Down syndrome, you're probably not going to be able to train them how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just but most people can play basketball, except maybe a paraplegic's not going to, might be able to shoot.
Right.
So it's something that most people can do, but also like a sport, you have to develop it. You can't just sit down and, some people might be more naturally talented than others, but for the most part, it's something that people have trained for years and years and years, and you're not always 100%.
Right.
So, in the intelligence community, we were talking, I think, offline about this, is you don't want to rely on one collection method to bet the farm on something. I mean, that's basically what we did with the Iran war, right? We ignored 18 intelligence agencies and just kind of believed what Netanyahu was telling Trump, and now we are where we are. So you want to make sure that you triangulate the intelligence, and again, the enemy, whoever you're dealing with, is going to feed you with a lot of BS too, right? So I think again we were talking about in World War II, we had Patton was in charge of this huge dummy battalion. They inflated a bunch of tanks and things like that, aimed them at Calais, and then had all this false radio traffic. So Hitler thought that the Allies were coming to Calais, and then we went to Normandy. So there's a lot of deception when it comes to signals traffic, so you have to be careful. You also have like MASINT, you have like geospatial intelligence, all sorts of stuff. Human intelligence, spies, and all that good stuff. And you want to try to triangulate all that. Remote viewing was one of those tools in the toolkit that can do that. Now, there are some times, before it was fully developed, in the late 70s, and this is something you can look up, but President Carter openly admitted that we found a Tupolev bomber in Africa. There was a female remote viewer who just got a map and located it within a mile on the vast continent of Africa. And they went there and we recovered it. And
Can you Google that? Wow, that is a remarkable story. It's like basically they just said, hey, they gave coordinates or something.
I think she just like pointed at a map. I don't know exactly how it was done, but yeah.
So while serving as president, scroll down, he publicly revealed that the CIA once used a psychic to successfully locate a downed government plane in Africa. So while serving as president, a small U.S. aircraft disappeared over the jungle in Central Africa, then Zaire. Unable to locate the wreckage with spy satellites, then CIA Director Stansfield Turner suggested contacting a woman in California who claimed to have supernatural abilities. According to Carter's account, the woman went into a trance, wrote down the specific latitude and longitude coordinates. U.S. intelligence refocused their satellite cameras to those exact coordinates, and the wreckage was found covered by the jungle canopy. Wow. That is remarkable. And this work aligned with the Stargate Project, a defense intelligence agency and CIA program from 72 to 95. Wow. Now, when people look at this, they might say like, okay, $20 million over, 20 years for the U.S. government.
What's a steal?
That's not much. That's like a drop in the bucket. And I've heard people say this is a high impact, low cost technology that they could actually work on. Do you think that that is a fair way to assess remote viewing, or do you think that it's even, like higher impact than people assume? I think people are like, oh yeah, you're throwing money at all this random stuff to see if anything comes back, and this was one of the things that they happen to throw money at. Or do you think that there's a technology here that's even more reliable than people might think?
I think it's more reliable than people think. And I think, again, this ended in 1995. If they still continued to iterate and innovate privately, I'm pretty sure it's a lot farther along. So for instance, when they first started this, there was no defense against it, right? But you talk to remote viewers today, sometimes when they review Target, so Edward Reardon, who works at the Future Forecasting Group, which is a group of remote viewers that are paid basically to remote view, where they get targets and then are constantly putting out content. They actually, I think it's like Future Forecasting Group, where you can go, they have a YouTube channel where they just show it. They just put it out there and then you can assess whether or not it works. But he was doing one target and he kept like getting inundated with like this music. So and he believes that that's a technique that has been developed by someone to prevent you from anybody from just viewing people in space and time, right? So there are, I would guess, countermeasures that have been developed that are out there.
With what confidence could you say that the government has continued a program like this, even past 1995?
99%.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you why I say that. So Dean Radin has publicly stated that it's gone, quote unquote, quiet. And what it means when he says it goes quiet is it's not classified, but when it goes quiet, you can still do it, but you don't have to read people in on anything. So paradoxically, fewer people know about it. So it's very likely that at the very least, they're hiring contractors, people, and like, I would not be surprised if like they were bringing in Lynn and stuff like that. He'll never talk about it. He'll never say anything. He's never said a word about it, but there are skilled remote viewers that, you can still pay to find these things. And I honestly don't know if he's still doing it, but I would also imagine that there were other programs that were independent of the Army's program, because the only one they shut down was the Army's one. I mean, it was tied to CIA and DIA, but it was still within the Fort Meade group. There was also a group in Army Special Forces that was designed not by Ingo Swann, but there was some cross-fertilization, but by this guy, Richard Ireland. Richard Ireland, and you can actually, if you look him up too, because I want to make sure I get his name, but he was a gifted natural psychic. So Army Special Forces just pulled him in and say, how do you do what you do? Like, you're really good at what you're doing. So they developed their own protocol that was similar to the kind of controlled remote viewing, but slightly different, which is now they call it the Hawaiian Remote Viewers Guild, kind of HRVG, okay? Which is, similar but a little bit different. They have something called the blackboard, and you think about what you're viewing, and then you kind of just write it out.
This guy here, Richard Ireland?
Yep, that's him.
Oh, wow. And can you scroll down, maybe just get like a bio on him? See if there's anything there. He was the Flamboyant Clairvoyant. It's a nice little name.
It's the first time I heard of that, but that's
interesting. And so he was contracted?
I think so, yeah. They hired him brought him into a room and tried to learn everything that they can.
Wow.
So his method is still taught by a guy named Glenn Wheaton today, he was also associated with that First Earth Battalion stuff. You familiar with that? With the men at Stereo-Goats, that whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that was deliberately meant to be ridiculous, so people would, believe this stuff was not real.
Mm-hmm.
But he was the colonel, like the colonel that was in that movie was based on him. So I think his name was like John Channon or something like that.
Okay.
Or Jim Channon, something like that. So all these people are tied together in various ways. There's also something called remote influencing, where you can influence people remotely. Like I think Lynn Buchanan did some project on Saddam Hussein. And there's anecdotal stories. I think Jeffrey Mishlove may have put this out there. I think I asked Lynn, and Lynn said, well, that's what they reported they saw, right? But as he was remotely influencing Saddam Hussein, his eyes turned from blue to brown. He said some woman walked in and like screamed or something.
Wow.
Again, this is reported by Jeffrey Mishlove, and then Lynn didn't deny it. He's just like, yeah, some lady came in and said that.
Hey guys, we're going to take a break really quick because I want to talk to you about GLD. This is an awesome new company that we're working with that I'm actually wearing right now. I actually got this crucifix right here. And honestly, even just getting it, sometimes like when you work with some companies, you're like, all right, I really hope the product is good. This one is. I wear it all the time. This is actually like the new crucifix. I lost my last one at a bathhouse. Literally at a sauna, I lost my crucifix, which is maybe God's way of telling me something. But I got a new one from GLD, and I've been rocking it nonstop. My wife likes it, and it's got like a nice weight to it. The details actually look better in person. The clasp is like super solid. It doesn't feel like something you bought like in Times Square from a random dude. It doesn't feel like something you ordered from, a sketchy website on Temu. And they got everything: chains, pendants, bracelets, watches. Whether you want something subtle or something that's like, I just signed a deal. You know what I mean? If you want like the record deal chain, they got that too. Now, if I haven't convinced you yet, let me sweeten the deal a little bit, all right? For a limited time, the listeners of this program, Camp Gagnon, Religion Camp, History Camp, and the entire camp universe, you're getting a crazy deal. If you use the code CAMP, C-A-M-P, when you check out, you're going to get 40% off your entire order at GLD.com. That's 40% off your whole order with the code CAMP at checkout at GLD.com. And after you purchase, they're going to ask where you heard about GLD. Tell them you heard about them from, the good folks here at the campsite. Mark and Christos sent you. And whenever you do that, it really helps, support the show. And thank you so much to GLD, and thank you to you for tuning in. Let's get back to the show. So you have these military programs that are doing this kind of stuff, but so many of these programs are classified. It's difficult to know what exactly is going on. I'm sure these same types of tests have been done in like closed academic settings where you have researchers that are testing this stuff to see, is it actually accurate? Is it just a random guess? What can you tell me about actual like closed sort of double-blind tests that have been done by academic institutions?
So we talked a little bit about SRI, and that's what SRI was
This is
doing.
Stanford Research Institute.
I believe SAIC was also doing, again, these are not like public institutions. I'm not aware of Stanford having done any of these. That doesn't mean that they didn't do that, because that would be like Stanford University, that would be the first. There was a lab called PAIR. It stands for like Paranormal something lab. It was at Princeton University.
Mm-hmm.
And that lasted for a few decades. And they proved this stuff exists. There's the Rhine Center at Duke. There was a place in Brooklyn. I can never pronounce the name of the hospital. It's like MAIMONDES or something.
Wow.
Maides or something like that, where they tested all sorts of different psychic functioning. Dean Radin continues to do experimental studies that show, odds against chance of well over like a quadrillion for some of these sort of things.
Wow. And like, how do these tests, like, how do they set them up? Like, what would be an example?
Well, I'll give you one for, since it's fresh in my mind. So it's a little bit similar topic, but let's say dream telepathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's real. So there was a gentleman, his name is Dr. Stanley Krippner, right? I literally just interviewed him, but he was very interested in dreams. So he wanted to see if someone could communicate to somebody else in a dream. So the way he set up his study is he had somebody sleeping and they were measuring REM state. And then in another room, they would give someone a picture. And then they would tell the person with the picture who was awake, just think about the picture, act out the picture, like just find ways to communicate it to the person in the other room. And then when the person in the other room they assessed they were in the REM sleep stage, they'd wait a little bit, but then they would wake them up and they would just say, what were you dreaming about? And they would kind of describe their dreams. And then I believe they would just take those descriptions, give it to independent judges, give them like, I don't know, I'm just making this part up, but like 12 different pictures. And one of which was the one that the person in the other room would show them. And based on the descriptions, and if it was done right, which I believe it was, they wouldn't know what it was either, right? It would be double blind. And they would just, based on the description of the dreamer, they would pick the same picture that the person in the other room communicated. Now, it wasn't always that way, but odds against chance were overwhelming.
Right.
right? So they did a number of different experiments like that. They also tested it against phases of the moon. They tested it against solar flares, like geomagnetic storms, basically. So the more geomagnetic activity there is, the less you dream, the less you are able to do any of this stuff. Phases of the moon, and this has been told to me by people who are occult experts, that you'll generally has been reported across Hermeticism and like for eons that you're more likely to have dreams when the fuller the moon is. So like full moon, you'll have dreams. That's what Krippner's studies confirmed.
Wow.
He didn't even know that. Like, it's just the left hand's not talking to the right hand. So there's definitely stuff behind this. But there's similar studies that are like that would have shown remote viewing. In fact, they brought in a statistician. I think her name was Jessica Utz, something like that. And she was a statistician that reviewed a bunch of the targets that the military teams worked on. And she said, like the odds against chance it's impossible that it was anything other than that.
Wow.
Now, there was someone else who was working with her who came to the opposite conclusion, but it was a little bit.
Oh, wow. So is this her?
Yep.
Can you go down to her Wikipedia? I wonder if this is on there. Investigation of remote viewing. Can you click on that? So 1995, American Institutes for Research appointed a panel consisting of Utz and Ray Hyman to evaluate a project investigating remote viewing. A report by Utz claimed the results were evidence of psychic functioning. However, Hyman in his report argued Utz's conclusion that ESP had been proven to exist, especially precognition, was premature and the findings had not been independently replicated. Interesting. Now, Utz also co-authored papers with the parapsychologist Edwin May, who took over Stargate in 1985. The psychologist David Marks noted that because Utz had been publishing papers with May, that she was not independent in her research, which is very convenient that the woman that found it to be the case actually was not independent at all, and actually all of her conclusions are bubkiss. That's very interesting.
Yeah, so they say.
Wow. It's fascinating that this kind of stuff is like, I've heard of these kinds of experiments being done in closed trials where you give someone a target and you put a color into an envelope and it's double blind, where the person that's administering the envelope isn't even familiar with which color is in there. And they're able to determine which color is inside the envelope at like a 70 to 80% rate. Whereas like, I think it was like 5 or 6 different colors that could be in there. I mean, the odds of just randomly guessing it would be remarkably low. And to get it to that level of effectiveness is really interesting. It's also interesting to me that it's not 100%. So I guess at this point, it's like, okay, this has been disclosed that it's being used in the military and that this has been used as military intelligence. You yourself, with your background, are 99% sure this is still being employed in some capacity. We have clinical trials within closed environmental conditions to actually test this stuff with alarming accuracy. This brings us to this point where it's like, how? What is going on? How were people able to meditate or close their eyes and see things that they should not be able to see? What could possibly be going on?
So this is where we get into lots of speculation, right? So this is one that I've talked about before. There's something called E8 lattice theory. And this is not what the theory says, but I'm just kind of taking this theory and kind of trying to apply to it. But what it says is that reality is kind of made out of like an 8-dimensional hypersphere, right? And then our reality is just a 4-dimensional, time being the 4th dimension, projection of that sphere. And the smallest unit of that reality is something called like these things called quasi-crystals, which are of Planck length. And each reality, you have these overlapping realities, and we could talk about that in the next episode, but we're a lower projection of the 8-dimensional hypersphere. And you could imagine that there would be an infinite number of these shadows. So some of the phenomena that we might see could be, just like you have a radio signal, right? There's sometimes bleed over, or there might be something in some other reality that figured out how to get through that. But putting that aside, if our reality is kind of based on this 8-dimensional hypersphere, then if we were to extract ourselves upward, higher dimensions, right? It's just like if you're walking through where we are, right, in Brooklyn, right? I can't see an accident 6 miles away, but if somebody added a third dimension and was standing on top of a building, right, they would be able to see a lot farther than we would. Just think of it that way. And this is how remote viewing may operate. The other thing that is important to note is time might be simultaneous, right? So let's take, I'm throwing a lot of things out here, but take like paranormal activity, right? Where you see a ghost, right? Is that really someone who's dead, or is that just some glitch in the matrix where that reality was, since everything is simultaneous, is vibrating at a certain frequency, and sometimes they just sync. You briefly see someone from 100 years ago, whereas, since time is simultaneous, they're operating right now. They think you're the ghost. And then I'm not saying that's what it is, again, speculating, but it operates on kind of that level. We all have access to kind of this 8-dimensional reality. To add a third thing, you've heard about quantum entanglement, right? Well, if you take this hypersphere, it's kind of like a holographic projection. One of a key property of a hologram is that if you take a shard of the hologram, you can reconstitute the whole. You can reconstitute everything. So if we're shards, or our reality is a shard of the hologram, we should have access as individual shards to the entire picture.
When you say the hologram, what do you mean taking a shard of a hologram?
Like the easiest way to describe it is when you're editing video software, right? If you take a snip of the video software and then put it in another file, you can still reconstitute the entire video because all the information is there. I think some aspect of reality is we're all like that. We have access to everything. And again, it's like this gets new agey, we're all one and stuff. But I think that's the holographic principle that may, again, I am speculating all this stuff. I could be completely off my rocker, but I think it operates in that way. And all these people are doing is they're just accessing that information that we can all access.
Interesting. So is anyone able, I guess you were describing like, okay, not anyone is able, but like me, for example, could I be taught how to remote view?
Yes.
And how would I be taught?
You would just find somebody who has a remote viewing course and you would enroll in it. I mean, Future Forecasting Group has them. You can learn from Lynn Buchanan. You just go to his website and you can sign up for a course. Now, are you going to get, ideally you want to be trained personally, but you can still go online and like take probably like Coursera or whatever there's another one I'm blanking on, but they're not paying me, so it doesn't matter. So yeah, it's something that anybody can learn.
Is it dangerous?
For most people, no. But there have been instances, like very, very like limited, where you just get access to this information and you start to have like a God complex a little bit. But you have to be doing this like every day, constantly. And the story I'll tell you about that is with David Morehouse, right? He kind of got to see how things worked. And what happens is your intuition goes on overdrive. So when you start to interact with people who are authority figures, like it's easy to see, it's much easier to see right through them. And you're not as willing to just check yourself. And so you'll do things that are not great from a career perspective because you see right through people, right? And you realize that this guy's lying about everything.
Right. You're no longer operating the hierarchy of society. You're kind of removed from it. And as a result, you see this whole thing's an illusion. And then once you start acting like society is an illusion, the society is going to be pissed.
Yeah. So when I said, yes, there's dangers, like I'm making it sound like there's going to be a demon that inhabits you and takes you over. And the dangers are more how the real world reacts and how so you're going to be much more intuitive. You'll start to see and hear things that you generally wouldn't pick up on. The other thing is if you view the wrong target, I shouldn't say wrong target, but there are some targets that can put your life in jeopardy, right? Let's say that, I'm trying to think of something that, let's say that you have the brilliant idea that you want to map all the U.S., where every U.S. ICBM is, and what their corresponding targets are. And then you want to and you publish that on the internet, right? Like,
you're going to get a knock at the door.
You're going to get disappeared, as you should be. Right? Like, so there's things like that. There are targets that Future Forecasting Group was offered an insane amount of money to do, and they turned it down because and I don't know what the target was, but if the viewers got access to that information, it would put their lives in danger.
Who was asking for the information?
I don't know. This is one of those things that you just don't...
You don't dig into.
Yeah, I mean, let's say... no, I'm not even going to speculate because I'll make it... Because I literally don't know. I don't know what the target... I just know that it was an obscene amount of money.
Is it possible someone could know that they've been remote viewed?
Yes. If they're kind of trained to do that. When remote viewers remote view non-human intelligences, they get noticed. Like Lynn Buchanan, when he remote viewed those 4 bases, they saw them and they're like, it's fine. Look at what you want. Don't, we're not going to be upset, but we see you. We know you're there.
Which 4 bases? So
Mount Zeal in Australia. There's a base in Zimbabwe. I forget what. Again, I'm saying it like there is. This is what they observe. There's multiple remote viewers have observed these. Mount Hayes in Alaska. That's like right in the middle of the Alaskan Triangle where people always disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Mount Perdido in Spain, and that's a whole other thing. Like Steve Mera and I think Barry Fitzgerald ran you should definitely talk to those guys. They're focused on the phenomena, right? And they look at places that have negative magnetic anomalies, which is generally where a lot of weird things tend to happen. And don't ask me to explain what negative magnetic anomaly is, because I've asked that question like 60 times to different people and nobody can ever explain it to me. But it's just something weird going on with the magnetic field there.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a...
So it says here from the AI on Google, it occurs when the local magnetic field in an area is weaker than the Earth's expected background magnetic field. It typically is caused by rocks with reverse magnetic polarity. Interesting. So ocean floor basalt that cooled and solidified during a period of the Earth's magnetic poles were flipped will magnetize in the opposite direction. Strange.
Yeah, now I can't remember. Can you look? This will be important. It won't make any sense when I ask it, though. Can you look where the majority of Canada's uranium mines are? I'll tell you in a second. It's related to Mount Perdido, which is strange. I just can't remember what the name of the...
Now, these 4 bases, they're... Okay, you got it here.
Yes, Athabasca, the Athabasca Basin.
In Saskatchewan.
So when they investigated this, Mount Perdido, like a lot of strange things happen. One of the things that they did is they had like a GPS, and they sent a signal, a signal in that area, and the geomagnetic coordinates that came back were for the Athabasca Basin, which is in, Canada, in Saskatchewan. So they think there's a portal that leads between the two, or that it temporarily opened. The odd thing is, you said basalt. I didn't put that together until right now. There's a ton of basalt in that region where they mine the uranium. So
another spot of potentially a reverse magnetic polarity.
Yeah, potentially. I don't know for sure, but
right.
There, it has been reported that they just got this. It's just like, what the hell? Why are we getting the grid for a place that's thousands of miles away across the Atlantic Ocean?
Strange.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird weird stuff like that.
So he looks at these bases, and when you say base, you mean non-human intelligence bases? And he goes to these places and he looks for something.
Yeah, and he finds non-human intelligences working with humans.
So if we were to go to these places, will we see them in our present reality, or is this something that exists in kind of like the liminal in-between reality?
We would see them. We would see them. Did I tell you all? Yeah, I told you all 4.
And can anyone go to these places, or do you think are they blocked off by governments?
No, you can. Well, if you go to Mount Hayes, you'll very likely disappear, because that's the Alaska Triangle, right? It's like right in the middle, and there's a huge number of disappearances there.
I mean, this one in Spain, though.
So a lot of weird. Like if you talk to the locals, they see UFOs all the time, but they see it so often they don't talk about it. So, or they don't put much. They're like, yeah, we saw one of these cigar-shaped things going over our head, etc. And you get, when these guys went there, they got really sick. Like when Steve described it to me, it sounded to me like radiation sickness. So yeah, there's lots of weirdness. It's not safe.
So you said Hayes in Alaska, Spain,
Mount Perdido,
and then what were the other 2?
Mount Zeal in Alaska, and then it's a place in Zimbabwe. It's like I can't pronounce it.
I mean, isn't Zimbabwe also the place where that craft landed for all those kids?
Yes, Rua. Yeah.
And if you were just to walk up to these places, you think that something or somehow you would be rejected from going in there, or potentially disappear?
Potentially disappear. Now, Mount Hayes, Alaska, I would put the highest confidence that you would disappear, because it's in the middle of like rugged mountainous terrain in Alaska, right? So any number of things could happen. You could be eaten by bears. It's just, there's an obscene number of people that disappear when they go in there. It could also be that they uncover this thing and then they're disappeared.
So Buchanan goes and remote views these places, and whatever non-human intelligence is there saw him and was like, oh, we know that you're doing this. Now, I've also heard a story, I forget who it was, that someone remote viewed another planet and started to see like all sorts of weird stuff, like basically like a factory or something like that of non-human intelligence.
They did this all the time. Like
was that Ingo Swann? I don't think it was Ingo Swann.
They all did. Like Ed Dames, who recently passed, as practice targets, he would have people look.
Oh, yes, it was Ingo Swann. So in a recorded session, prominent psychic Ingo Swann was tasked to remotely view the planet Jupiter 6 years before the NASA Voyager mission. Swann reported the planet possessed a thin atmosphere. Oh, that's right. So at the time, astronomers did not widely accept that Jupiter had a ring system, but Swann's observations were later confirmed by the Voyager flybys. Now, there was another one. Oh, it might have been McGonagall.
Yes, McGonagall was the Mars one, a million years back.
Yeah.
That's McGonagall.
Reportedly visualized the red planet as having ancient Earth-like atmosphere, massive pyramid-like structures, and indigenous extraterrestrial beings. And I think, according to the story, that he sort of goes to this place, remote views it, and that they look at him, and he's sort of seeing what they're doing. And then I think on maybe 1 or 2 different occasions is like shut out and like kind of pushed out of the view and is kind of like sent back or something to that effect. And that there was like a haze that was all around. It's escaping me the exact details. But it's these kinds of things that it's like, okay, well, now this is wild.
Well, my question would be, why did the CIA send them a million years back?
Right.
Well, they knew something, and they were just trying to kind of verify it. So, I mean, you've heard about the face on Mars, Cydonia. Mm-hmm. There's another one on Galaxis Chaos. You familiar with that? Mm-hmm. So there's another one that Dr. John Brandenburg found. He also, using the radiological like mapping of where like lithium and argon, like the isotopes of those are placed on the planet, it looks like there were 2 extremely large, like the size of skyscrapers, thermonuclear weapons that were dropped on those 2 locations that basically evaporated the Martian ocean in about 250 million years ago, something like that.
And that's this one?
Yep, that's Galaxis Chaos. See the face up in the upper left?
Right. Now, wait, so, and who did that view?
No, it wasn't remote viewing. That was like the Viking expedition. Picked up pictures of that stuff.
It looked like a thermonuclear...
Oh, they did like a radiological survey on one of the Mars missions.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. John Brandenburg analyzed it. He saw that for certain isotopes on that planet, they weren't found anywhere else in the solar system, right? Because our solar system has the same kind of radiological scheme, basically, except for places on Earth where we tested thermonuclear weapons and Mars. And the only other thing that we know of, it could be maybe something else, some phenomenon we're not aware of yet, that can have a signature like that is a thermonuclear weapon or a supernova. And we're still here, so it's not a supernova.
Wow.
So what he did is he analyzed rock samples, or they analyzed rock samples kind of 250 to 500 million years back that had hit Earth that didn't have these isotopic ratios, and then stuff that hit Earth since that did. So something happened. So it could be that whatever was left there, because it wasn't that he just went a million years back. He went go a million years back to as far as there were people that were left there. So these might have been the same people who had survived that cataclysm.
Wow.
So yeah, this stuff is, he's also the guy that discovered the ocean on Mars, but they didn't credit it to him because it was tied to this theory.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Oh, wow. And what was his name?
Dr. John Brandenburg.
John Brandenburg. I got to look into him.
Yeah, he's a plasma physicist. Yeah.
What do you know about plasma?
Oh, man. That's a whole other...
I just downloaded New Science of the Heavens by Robert Temple.
I have not read that book, but I keep hearing about it. There was
Randall Carlson told me about it.
There was a call for papers back in September of 2024 at Harvard about sentient plasmoids. So, like with plasma, you can basically they exhibit signs of what appear to be intelligent control, reproduction, all sorts of stuff. It just happens like much faster than or appears to happen, I should say, much faster than in human or like in organic life.
Right. I mean, it's what, 90 to 99% of the known universe is plasma?
Of the known visible universe, yeah.
Right.
Because there's dark matter and that's just what they use to stuff they can't explain.
Right. Yeah. What's up, guys? We're going to take a break real quick because I want to tell you about a brand that I actually love. You've probably seen ads for it on Instagram, and it's Ultra. It's the best. As you already know, I'm super locked in on like fitness and sleep and fasting and all that kind of stuff. And one thing that I care about now is getting energy and focus without feeling like jittery and cracked out and on edge, like my heart is beating out of my chest. And that's why I reached out to Ultra. Ultra pouches have 0 nicotine, 0 caffeine pouches that give you clean focus and smooth energy when you need to lock in. And a lot of people think pouches are helping them at the gym, but nicotine is actually a vasoconstrictor. It actually narrows your blood vessels and restricts oxygen delivery to your muscles and can actually work against the pump that you're trying to get. It also can raise your heart rate and your blood pressure, which is not exactly what you want when you're already training super hard. Ultra gives you that pouch experience. It's fun, it tastes good, but it's 100% nicotine-free, and they use clinically proven nootropics and adaptogens to deliver immediate focus and smooth energy that lasts 1 to 2 hours. And if you're fasting or dieting, they actually can help you quiet the cravings and limit the food noise to help keep you locked in. And they have 5 flavors: cool mint, wintergreen, watermelon, tropical, blue raz. My favorite is blue raspberry, and it tastes amazing. I have the watermelon ones right here because I already finished the blue raz, but these are great too. Now, Ultra is the ultimate guilt-free pouch, delivering instant focus and mental clarity without nicotine or caffeine. And new customers can use the code CAMP, C-A-M-P, to get 15% off when you go to takeultra.com. That's takeultra.com for 15% off with the code CAMP. And after you purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them. Please tell them that Mark and Christos from the campsite sent you. Now let's get back to the show. Now, your theory as to like what's going on with remote viewing, this sort of reality paradigm where we exist sort of in like this measurable, observable reality, but there's actually a more broad reality that's sort of on top of that, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, we're just like a shadow or a hologram, like a projection of a much deeper and more information-dense reality.
And that kind of can account for precognitive dreams.
100%.
I mean, telepathy to an extent. I mean, basically all these sort of psi phenomena that people are talking about are kind of connected to that understanding of reality.
Yeah, psychokinesis, same thing.
And precognitive dreams is something that you've also kind of looked at and experienced to an extent. Is that true?
Yeah, so what I do is anything that has that flavor, I'll just write it down and I'll publish it. And then, like, the thing that we just talked about at the very beginning with the, I'm not sure if that's a precognitive dream, right? But it's sure as hell was a weird synchronicity, right? But I've had other things that, I'll give you one specific example. I had a dream back in, I think, March of 2025. I wrote it down on my YouTube channel, my community thing, just to timestamp it, basically. And I saw people in like winter green uniforms with like white lettering. And there was like also like a hint of orange somewhere else. And they were protesting. And for whatever reason, I'm like, I knew it was in Missoula, Montana. And there was a redheaded guy like yelling at somebody. Okay. So in December of 2025, Starbucks and Amazon had labor strikes in Missoula, Montana. And there wasn't a redheaded guy in the video of like local news, but it was a redheaded woman that was in there. Amazon has it's like an orange, black, and white, right? And then, as you know, like Starbucks is that hunter green and white. So it's not perfect, but that's a pretty solid hit.
Right. Specifically being in Missoula.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
So what does happen is if you start writing your dreams down, you'll start noticing it more often. It doesn't happen all the time. I can't control it, but I think everybody can do it. If you read Time Loops by Eric Wargo, I mean, I'll give you other really weird examples, right? You probably can't. It's not even a dream, but take my master's thesis, right? Like I wrote it 20 years ago. It's happening now. I published a anthology. I was an editor of an anthology. It's called Weird World War III. It had the U.S. against Russia, right? It came out in, I think, 2020. Putin invaded Ukraine in 2022, right? So there's, is that perfect? Kind of, no.
But I mean,
it's weird.
With those examples, it's like, well, you are an academic that's working in a specific field, studying things and able to kind of infer things, right?
Correct.
There's been many people like wrote about like, potential tensions with Iran erupting in some capacity. We've been talking about this for like 30 years.
100%.
Or maybe even since 79.
100%.
So with that, it's like, it's a little bit...
plausibly deniable, easily.
Right. That one's a little easier for me to be like, well, you might have just been, a great researcher. Yeah. And inferring things and able to kind of like predict some future stuff. But something like a dream that's really uncontrollable that then manifests is very strange. I remember reading a story of a woman that was, I'm sure I could find her name, but she basically, I think, had been involved. She was leaving her synagogue and I think was like struck by lightning in the parking lot. Like
I've heard this one.
Hit a nearby tree. Yeah. And she ends up going to the hospital, and then since then starts having like weird dreams. And so she goes and sees a psychologist because the dreams keep on kind of manifesting in like a really uncomfortable way. And she didn't want this to happen. She wanted it to stop. She was like, can you give me a drug to make me stop dreaming? And she goes and basically tells her therapist everything. And then the therapist is like, well, every time you have a dream, just email it to me. That way it's timestamped. And then with a very strange regularity, these dreams start getting timestamped. And one significant famous one is she's like, I had a dream. And I think this is probably, she's writing this around like 2007 or 8 or something. And she timestamps it to her therapist, who again is not someone involved in this world. It's just a regular old therapist. And her dream is that there's a plane flying through New York City. She thinks it's another terror attack. She's afraid. And then the plane crashes into the Hudson. And then within like the next week, Sully Sullenberger lands his plane onto the Hudson, basically as she described it. And it was, I think, published in a couple journals because they were like, well, we have the timestamp and then this thing happens. It's a pretty specific time and place. okay, Elizabeth Greenfield Crone, a woman from Houston who was struck by lightning outside of her synagogue in 1988. Yeah, she's getting out of the car and then has this near-death experience. If you scroll down, you can see some of the dreams. So, yeah, prescient nightmares that predict natural disasters. Do you have an example of one of these ones that she predicts?
Not her, but have you looked into Christopher Robinson?
Mm-mm.
So he worked for 30 years for MI6 and MI5, and he was a precognitive dreamer. But he would they would use him to foil IRA plots, and he saw the Lockerbie bombing before it happened. And it was so intense that he insisted that he write it down and put it in an affidavit, like a sworn affidavit, the day before it happened. And Scotland Yard was like, I don't know if you want to do this, because if it happens, they might suspect that you had something to do with it. It's just like, no, we have to do this. Like, I have to. And of course it happened. But strangely, he doesn't get a lot of attention. Like, it's so strange that it's suspicious. Christopher Robinson. Yeah, he's a British. He saw 9/11 too. He just didn't know if it was going to be in New York or London. Wow. And he also had a relationship with Thomas Drake. Are you familiar with him?
Mm-mm.
He was an NSA whistleblower. He was the one who was talking about this collection methodology that was completely illegal. They were collecting on American citizens. And he had to do some time, and it kind of ruined his life. I mean, he's coming back now. But
wow.
He knew Christopher Robinson, and Christopher Robinson warned him that he's going to get 9 charges. And the dream he had was like the 9 bottles of beer on the wall, right? And he said, he called him up, and I'm sure like FBI was, because it's a transatlantic call, was hearing this call, and basically he was trying to alert Thomas Drake that he was going to get 9 charges, and he was going to beat all of them, right? So can you imagine being the FBI, knowing that you're building a case on this guy?
And then he gets tipped off.
And having a precognitive dreamer telling him that he was going to be charged like 9 charges. And of course, Thomas Drake's like, that's ridiculous. It's not going to happen. Kind of like, relax. And sure as hell he did.
Wow. That is crazy. So yeah, he's a former executive of the NSA. Wow.
But there are connections here that you just don't hear about publicly. Like Chris Mellon knows about Christopher Robinson, right? He spoke to him personally and said, look, we don't have remote viewers. He called him a remote viewer, but he's more of a precognitive dreamer. But he's like, we don't have people who can do it as well as you do.
Wow.
So
now, how does this interface with like your theory, I guess, of like reality? Like, is there a God in this example? Is there a shared consciousness in this example? Like, what does that look like for you on like a personal basis?
So there's a God, but I don't, know what to call him. I grew up Catholic. I still kind of as a hedge, right? You've heard of Pascal's wager, right? So I kind of will rely on that to ground me so that I don't get too far into you get into some of this stuff, it can take you to some we haven't talked about, almost entirely about divination, but we haven't talked about, and these are definitions that Dean Radin came up with. We haven't talked about enchantment, and we haven't talked about theurgy, right? Which is theurgy is like the invocation of, for lack of a better word, non-human intelligences. God could be one, it could be others, but and even Dean Radin will tell you, like, enchantment and divination is kind of one thing, but once you start messing like with theurgy, that's when people kind of can easily go off the rails because you don't know what you're dealing with.
Interesting.
But yeah, again, God, I believe that there's a God. Now, what is the nature of that God? It could be we're shards of one, consciousness that's experiencing itself. It sounds very New Agey, but and everything could have some level of consciousness. Right, even the table, things like that, and there's some quantum physics to support some level of that, right? So
I've heard it described as like panpsychism. There's like a term kind of to touch on this idea.
Yeah, and at one point the government, my understanding, so this could be pure speculation, but my understanding is that one of the reasons they don't want all this out is that once people realize they can, it's kind of a co-creation kind of reality. Once people realize that they can have more control of reality than they think, you have something called, you risk something called panpsychic collapse, right? That's why there's such like this huge effort on narrative control, right? You got to keep everybody on the same sheet of music, because if it starts to diverge, I think they were worried about reality kind of shattering in some sense. I don't know.
Like literal reality, like that it's somehow being subsisted by the fact that people don't know about it?
Yeah, everybody, that's why there's so much effort in terms of getting everybody in a common narrative.
We exist in sort of the shared reality, and once people are
diverge from it
and manipulating their own reality in some way on a physical level,
it starts to unwind. Yeah. There was I have a friend who was tasked on a project for someone who was in the orbit of somebody in the government. It could be, it was just some random crazy pet project, but that was the concern that he looked at was, what's the risk of panpsychic collapse? It was very philosophical,
Right.
It wasn't grounded, but yeah.
Now, you yourself have remote viewed before.
I've had had training in it, and I've done like 1 or 2 targets. I'm not very good because I have no practice.
Mm-hmm. And why do you not practice more?
Time.
Really? What fills the rest of the gaps of time? To me, I'm like, this is so exciting. If I was like,
I know, like
as connected as you are, I'd be like, dude, I'd be practicing all the time.
There's other things you can try that are, not disclosed, or that you can, at this point, like the whole disclosure movement, we can talk about that, but I've given up on the government. Like, they're not going to tell us anything. So again, this is why the grounding with how I was raised kind of helps keep me there, because you try to experiment with different things, right? So like dreaming, trying to visit other people in dreams, things like that, just testing it out, getting consent from somebody, seeing what they experience, and then trying it again or not trying it. There's other things that I think we might be capable of that the only way you're ever going to find out is if you try.
And you've had success with that.
I mean, define success. Like I've told somebody, hey, I'm going to try it. And then the next day they either say like, don't ever do that again, but it could be, right? It's a correlation thing. It's not a definitive causation thing, right? It could be that maybe I triggered their subconscious, and then they had a dream, and then I had a dream that had similar results, right? But it could have been entirely separate. I had nothing to do with it. It could be that I did interact in some fundamental way, or it could be something interacted on my behalf on a fundamental, way. There's an episode that we did. Are you familiar with Laird Barron?
I'm familiar with the name, yeah.
So he's probably the finest horror writer of our generation. He had a movie that was made, I think it was called They Remain, something like that, on one of his novellas called 30. And his entire life, and he's an interesting character in and of himself. Like, he's got like a very dark, he's a good guy, but with like a dark history. So he competed in the Iditarod.
Oh, wow.
Like he's like from Alaska, all sorts of crazy Alaska stories. His grandfather like disappeared. They thought he may have been eaten by a bear, like just crazy stuff. But growing up, his dreams were haunted, and until recently, like he was haunted his entire life in his dreams by this entity. Oddly enough, it inspired a lot of the horror that he wrote, but he had other family members that saw this thing physically, like in person. And it was just like this tall, pale man that had like an elongated torso and would just kind of like taunt family members and then just kind of just like disappear like evaporate into the. So his brother, who had experienced this, won't talk about it anymore, and is like hardcore Pentecostal, kind of just pushed in that direction.
So not even in dreams, just like
physically saw this
in
thing.
the kitchen. This entity would show up.
Saw him. Oh, the two instances. Well, actually saw him in a basement during like as a child at sleepover. Saw him in Alaska, like outside, and then one morning he was like in front of him walking to school, and then just kind of faded into the snowbank. So anyway, whatever this thing was would haunt Laird his entire. And there's a whole episode on this where we're talking about it together. So we tried. You want to try this dream experiment and just see if we can get rid of this thing? Well, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, right? But let's just see what happens. In 2 previous examples with friends, I would just do it. Like I would ask them for permission and I would do it. And then they would have horrific nightmares. So I would say maybe it was just again, it could be I triggered some subconscious thing. Like I fully admit that this is not scientific study, but there were meaningful impacts. So I would pray when I would try it on somebody else and it would moderate it. So I kind of said a prayer and we, had separate dreams, but one night that I think tried, it was actually synchronistically, it was on the Sunday night, and it was a waning gibbous moon, which in occult circles, I didn't know this, was the best time for banishments and whatever. Again, I don't participate in the cult or any of that stuff, but he had one dream that night. I had a series of 3 dreams. So the first dream that I had was I was in like a hotel room. Motel room I didn't want to be in. And all these people came into the hotel room or motel room, I keep saying. And I didn't want them in there. I felt really uncomfortable. And someone had stolen $500. And then he may have showed up or a friend. I can't remember exactly what it was. And he's like, hey, you want to come to this restaurant? It's my favorite restaurant or whatever. And I'm like, my dad's there. And I'm like, I need to call the police. And my dad's like, no, you're an idiot. You shouldn't have left $500 there. You're never going to get it back, whatever. So anyway, I reluctantly go. He goes into this restaurant. It's a maze. Can't find him. Okay. The second dream, I'm in my bedroom. My son's kind of laying next to me. And have you ever seen The Outer Limits, like that old show? There's okay, I'm trying to think of this a way. Have you ever been to Washington State? Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen those ant mounds that are like the size of people? Yeah. Okay, so the best way I can explain this is at the foot of my bed, we're on the 2nd floor, but this thing somehow manages to push itself up out of the bed, and kind of at the foot of my bed, you have this like ant mound like thing, and there are these like two ant-like entities, brownish, kind of with like a bat sort of flavor, and I kind of recognize them in the dream, and I just kind of acknowledge them, and I feel a little bit uneasy, but then they just start burrowing back down and then burrowing back up under my feet. And I'm like, oh, hell no, right? Then the next dream I have, same night, I'm in my kind of backyard at home as a child. No, I'm not a child in the dream, but I see in this above ground pool that we had, there's a lance, and the lance is impaling these 7 or 6 silhouettes. And there's a presence behind me. And I kind of say to the presence, I'm like, don't you think that's kind of a little much, a little provocative? And the voice is like, no, it's fine. So Laird, that night, he has a separate dream. Throughout his life, this entity is like, no matter what he did in his dreams, it would always just mock him, plague him, and hurt people that he loved. Like he started working out when he was younger, so he would like dismember it in the dream, and it would still taunt him, stuff like that. In his dream, he saw this entity. It was like a superhero physique, right? And it was screaming at him. And I kind of had like red sort of skin, like just white hot, like off color eyes, screaming at him inside a magic circle. And then it morphed into a Australian shepherd which is a dog that he kind of likes. And then that thing starts growling, starts going crazy, and it's just running around the circle, trapped. And he said that after that, like, he didn't have any dreams like that. About a week later, something came back, and we did the same thing, same exercise. I actually have to connect with him, see if it ever came back. And I said, well, let's try to do it again. And he was in the airport, and there was like a bag of trash, and he would have had to throw something out or something. And he opens it up, and there's this guy's like head, and there's all these like body parts, and it's like starting to come back together. And he said that this figure from behind, at the airport, he was at the airport when this was happening, like jumped over the cashier's desk or whatever the heck it was. He said it was just a shadow and helped him contain this thing. And that was it. So again, correlation does not imply causation, but as far as I know, he hasn't reached back out.
Wow.
So I don't know what happened. It's just he's been plagued with this thing, and
you do this sort of dream thing, and you just kind of set your intention before you go to sleep?
I actually prayed for this one. I actually asked, I prayed to God, I prayed to St. Michael, and I prayed to St. Gabriel, or the Archangel Michael and Gabriel. So that's why I said it could be me. It could be one of the, just some non-human intelligence that took care of this thing. But whatever it was fucking pissed.
Wow. Bizarre.
It was bizarre. I can't explain what it is. I'm just laying out like the correlations. Again, for the audience, it could totally be, I'm totally open to it being the subconscious of both of us just feeding off of each other. I don't know, but he's never had a dream like that before.
Right. And the outcome is that this thing is now not plaguing him anymore. So even if
as far as I know, I haven't reached out to him recently.
But even if it's purely placebo, it's like, well,
yeah.
It worked.
Yeah, it could be a placebo effect, 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
But it also could be some type of entanglement in some type of other realm. Swann, thank you so much, brother. I really appreciate it. This is awesome. Where can people find your show if they want to stay connected? So Through a Glass Darkly with Swann. I couldn't get the Through a Glass Darkly, but you can find that on YouTube. You can also find me on SeanPatrickHazlett.com. That's just a generic website. You can find me on Twitter at Sean P. Hazlett, at x.com. And I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, although I don't check it as much. I have a TikTok account now. It's the TAGD podcast there. And if people want to learn more about remote viewing specifically, where's the best place for that? So go to the Future Forecasting group. That's a good place to start. Also look up Lynn Buchanan, 1N. Also look up David Morehouse. Paul Smith, also pretty good. Daz Smith is another person. And then Ed Reardon. Amazing. Swann, thank you so much, brother. I appreciate it. Let's do it soon. Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you, Mark. Hey guys, if you love conspiracies and hypothetical history, well, I want to invite you to check out Signal 33. This is a companion pod to our podcast here at camp. It's made and edited by the same team that runs all of our shows, and I choose the topics every single week. So check it out, subscribe, and start the dialogue in the comment section.